All right, we're going to jump right in today with one of history's most chilling questions. To answer it, we're going to unpack the playbook, the very specific playbook of two of the most infamous figures ever to take power. You know, when we think about how a democracy dies, we often picture a sudden military coup, right? Tanks in the streets. But the truth is, it's rarely that dramatic. It's usually something much slower, a methodical dismantling from the inside. So how's it done? How does that actually happen? Well, let's unpack the playbook. Okay, so our two main characters, if you will, are Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany. Now, on the surface, these guys were pretty different. Different backgrounds, different paths. But what is just so striking and frankly terrifying is how similar their methods were for grabbing and holding on to absolute power. It's like they were reading from the same script. So first things first, you need the right conditions. You know, a would-be dictator doesn't just conjure up national anger out of thin air. No, they're more like an arsonist looking for a tinderbox. They find the resentment, the fear, the humiliation that's already there, and they harness it. They turn it into a weapon. And after World War I, boy, was there a lot of that tinder lying around. Both Italy and Germany felt deeply, profoundly humiliated. I mean, Italy was technically on the winning side, but they felt totally cheated out of the territory they were promised. They called it a mutilated victory. And Germany? Well, Germany was just crushed by the Treaty of Versailles. They were forced to take all the blame, pay insane amounts of money. It wasn't a treaty, it was a diktat, a dictated peace. The shared feeling of being wronged, that was the fertile soil where extremism could really take root. Now, in Italy, you have to add a huge dose of fear to that anger. This period, the Biennio Rosso, the 2 red years, was just wild. There were massive socialist strikes, factory takeovers. People were genuinely terrified of a full-blown communist revolution, just like what happened in Russia. So the factory owners, the middle class, they started desperately looking for a strong man, anyone who could promise to restore order and, crush the left. Germany's crisis, though, was just brutally economic. In 1923, you get this hyperinflation that is just mind-boggling. To pay war reparations, the government basically just printed money until it became worthless. And I mean worthless. Your entire life savings? Gone. Poof. Overnight. This is the period you hear about where people were literally taking wheelbarrows full of cash to the store just to buy a loaf of bread. Imagine that. How much faith would you have in your government after that? It was completely shattered. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, boom, the knockout blow, the Wall Street crash of 1929. See, the German economy had been propped up by American loans, and suddenly those loans just vanished. Businesses folded, and by 1932, a staggering 6 million Germans were out of work. That's almost 1 in 3 workers. When people are that desperate, they'll listen to anyone, especially extreme voices promising easy answers. Okay, so the stage is set, right? You've got this perfect storm of anger, fear, and just total economic despair. But how do you turn that feeling into actual political power? How does a tiny fringe movement go from the margins right to the very center of government? Well, for one thing, both men used violence in the streets as a political tool. Mussolini had his black shirts, right? They went around beating up socialists and trade unionists. Hitler had his SA, the brown shirts, who fought communists in the streets and basically intimidated anyone who got in their way. And the goal here is pretty simple and pretty cynical. First, you beat down your enemies. And second, you create so much chaos that people get desperate for your promise to restore law and order. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because you can see them learning as they go. In 1922, Mussolini pulls off this march on Rome, and honestly, it was mostly a bluff. The army could have stopped them easily, but the king panicked and just handed him the keys to the government. A year later, Hitler tries to copy him with a coup in Munich. It's a total disaster. He gets arrested, thrown in jail. But that's where he has this light bulb moment. He realizes, okay, trying to overthrow the system from the outside doesn't work. The real path to power is to get inside the system and destroy it using its own rules. And wow, this chart right here just shows you how well that new strategy worked. Just look at these numbers. In 1928, before the economic crash, the Nazis were a nobody party. 12 seats in parliament? That's nothing. But then the crash hits, and look, their support just explodes. By 1932, they are the single largest party in Germany. It's a straight line from economic desperation right to votes for the extremists. And this is the really critical takeaway. Neither of these guys seized power in some big, violent revolution. They were handed power, legally. Mussolini was appointed by the king. Hitler was appointed chancellor by the president. In both cases, you had this conservative old guard who was way more scared of the communists. They thought, hey, let's bring these popular, loudmouthed radicals into the tent. We can use them, control them, and then get rid of them. And, well, it turned out to be one of the most catastrophic miscalculations in modern history. So once they're inside the door, the next phase kicks off. This is the methodical demolition of democracy itself. And they don't do it with bombs. They do it with paperwork. They use the law to break the system. So here it is, the playbook laid out in 4 steps. Step 1, get appointed legally. We've seen that. Step 2, wait for or create a national crisis. Step 3, use that crisis to seize emergency powers. And step 4, use those new powers to get rid of everyone who stands in your way. And you better believe both leaders found the perfect crisis to exploit. For Mussolini, it was the murder of a prominent socialist leader named Mattiatti. It caused this huge public outcry. But instead of collapsing, Mussolini just doubles down and uses the chaos to his advantage. For Hitler, it was like a gift from heaven. The Reichstag, the parliament building, burns down. He immediately screams, "It was the communists!" and uses the panic to get the president to sign a decree that basically suspends all civil rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, gone. Just like that. And Mussolini, after that Mattiatti crisis, he walks into parliament and gives this absolutely audacious speech. He basically stands up and says, yeah, all that fascist violence, I take full responsibility for it, all of it. He was daring them, daring anyone to challenge him, and nobody did. That was the real beginning of the end for Italian democracy. So then they used the law to make their power permanent. In Italy, Mussolini pushes through something called the Acerbo Law, which was just this blatantly rigged rule that gave his party 2/3 of the seats in parliament, basically guaranteed control. In Germany, Hitler surrounds the parliament with his brown shirts to intimidate everyone and forces them to pass the Enabling Act. This law literally gave him the power to make laws all by himself, without parliament. And that was it. Democracy was officially dead. Okay, so you've got total power. Great. Now, how do you keep it? How do you make sure no one can ever challenge you again? Well, you're gonna need a whole toolbox of control. And this table here lays it out beautifully. It's the same core toolkit. First, propaganda. You build this massive cult of personality. Mussolini becomes Il Duce, the leader. Hitler becomes Der Führer, also the leader. Then you need terror. Secret police, the OVR in Italy, the Gestapo in Germany, to hunt down and crush anyone who speaks out. And maybe most important of all, you go after the kids. You indoctrinate the youth, creating a whole new generation that's fanatically loyal to you and your ideology. Their motto? Believe, obey, fight. But, it's not enough to just control people with propaganda and fear. To make your new radical regime seem legitimate, you have to get the old powerful institutions on your side. I'm talking about pillars of society, like the army and the church. And each of them made a really clever strategic move to do just that. Mussolini signs the Lateran Treaty with the Catholic Church, making peace with the Vatican after decades of tension. Bam! Suddenly he has the support of millions of religious Italians. Hitler does something even more brutal. In the Night of the Long Knives, he has the leaders of his own stormtroopers, the SA, murdered because the regular German army saw them as a rival. And what does he get in return? The army swears a personal oath of loyalty, not to the country, but directly to Hitler himself. And that was it. The process was complete. By 1926, Mussolini was Il Duce. By 1934, Hitler was Der Führer. Both were absolute rulers. The playbook had worked perfectly. So let's recap the playbook one more time. You exploit national humiliation, you use violence to create chaos, and then promise to fix it. You get your foot in the door legally, you use a crisis to grab emergency powers, and then you use the law itself to kill democracy for good. When you see these patterns laid out so clearly, the demonization of your opponents, the trashing of democratic rules and norms, the promise that only one strong leader can fix everything, it really forces you to ask a pretty important question, doesn't it? What are the warning signs we should all be looking for today?